today. Today is Thursday, April 1st. Happy Fool's Day. I hope none of you get too joked on today or have something crazy happen. We've got some good pranksters here at the hospital that like to pull some things, so I'm on guard. But today we have a very packed agenda, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ron Hart from the Lake County Water Authority. Take it away, Ron.
Okay, I'll go to share screen and hopefully you'll see my presentation in just a minute. Is that up and running for everybody?
We're good.
All right, as she mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for the Lake County Water Authority. My professional background is in limnology. For those of you that are unaware of that field, it's the study of lakes and freshwater ecosystems, and I've been working in this profession for the past 30 or 35 years, or maybe even longer than that, and particularly with Lake County Water Authority for about 25 years now. So I've been here for a long time. I grew up as a resident in Lake County. While I went to college, I worked my way through the education system here within Lake County, and I've never left. I've always lived in here even while I was going to college and commuted back and forth. So I've got a historical reference to our local lakes and water bodies that probably extends far deeper than most people have here in Lake County. The one thing I want to talk to you guys today is about something that is not just of environmental importance, but it's also of economic importance, and that is our lakes and water bodies, that they have a direct impact on businesses that locate are associated directly with these water bodies, but then also have indirect impact on the other surrounding communities and businesses that are away from these water bodies that also are dependent upon the people that come here to recreate or live along these water bodies that we have. And today's topic, of course, because it's relevant to South Lake County, is the Claremont Chain of Lakes. We've been having some minor algal blooms that have occurred on the Claremont Chain of Lakes over the years. I've seen them progressively get a little worse year by year. Of course, lakes never progress in one steady fashion. There's always good days and bad days that they have, kind of like our health. You don't wake up every day and feel great. You have sick days where you're not doing very well, and then days that you're doing very well. And our lakes are the same way with algal blooms, that we can have a severe bloom that will come on and then maybe not see it for several years. But we have seen a progression of slowly increasing greater amounts of algal blooms on the Claremont Chain of Lakes. And that's not something that should be normally happening. These lakes are outstanding Florida water bodies, and they're known for their exceptional water quality characteristics. So to see them having these algal blooms, particularly in the wintertime, is unusual. Okay, now let's see. There we go. Here's the three images that show or represent the bloom that occurred not this last February, but February of 2020. And you can see the pea green water that's in place. There are actually many areas on the lake where it was far worse than what these images represent. An example is I had one sampling day that we went out on West Beach, and I took some algal samples and measured for toxicity. And I dipped my arm down into the water, and I had to dip it about a foot before I could get below the algal mat that was on the surface. That is an extremely deep and dense amount of dead and rotting algal cells that were concentrated in that area of the shoreline. Now, why is this important? Well, it just so happens that this event was occurring as the triathlon was getting ready to happen last year. If it were not for COVID coming along and being a good reason for canceling the event, we would have had a dramatic black eye, not only in the press, but economically by them having to cancel the swimming portions out there in the lake, because the lake was not safe to allow swimmers to enter that water body. that is something we never, at least I never would have imagined happening in South Lake County on the Claremont chain of lakes. I would have never imagined that things would have progressed that quickly for water quality decline that dramatically over such a short period of time, that we would ever be sitting here talking about having to cancel the triathlon because of this major outbreak and poor water quality in the Claremont chain of lakes. So we got lucky, you know, as bad as COVID may be, environmentally speaking, and for the press that we would have gotten if we tried to hold that event and if we tried to allow those swimmers to swim in that water body, we got lucky that something really bad didn't end up occurring, and we ended up having a black eye on the image of South Lake County. So what exactly did occur? We had an algal species that bloomed that's referred to as the Licospermum. It is a cyanobacteria. It's one of the earliest known forms of life on planet Earth, that it is able to survive in some very difficult environments with very low levels of oxygen. So it was one of the first life forms that came along when our planet had very little oxygen in its atmosphere. It was actually the main producer of oxygen. The problem with this particular cyanobacteria is that it has the ability to produce a number of toxins. The most common toxin that it produces is one referred to as microcystin, which is a known liver toxin. And it also produces many other toxins that can affect your nervous system, as well as it can produce lipopolysaccharides, which are known to cause skin irritations and this is probably one of the least of issues for, you know, toxicity, particularly with humans, that if you go out there and swim, you're going to get a rash. That's probably a low level of concern, but, you know, it's not very comfortable to break out in a rash after you go swim because you've come in contact with this particular chemical. And it can aerosolize, so that people who live near the lake can experience breathing issues or irritation of the throat, the mucus, and the lungs from inhaling the air. And we had a number of people who commented on having those types of issues that were living next to, adjoining, or out on the lake. Even one of our water quality samplers commented that, you know, after a period of time out there collecting water quality, they had to get off of the lake or the water body because of it. You know, they could feel it causing, you know, some respiratory distress for them. So those are some of the symptoms that you can have from exposure. Now, not everybody has a similar type exposure. It all depends on, you know, a lot on what your sensitivity may be. There are people that easily have allergic reactions, and I happen to be one of those that every time pollen kicks in, I start having problems with allergies, things of that nature. And there's people that are more robust and not necessarily affected as greatly as what some others are. So everybody has two different people can swim in the same water. One can have a rash, and 5 others swimming right next to them will have absolutely no response at all and not notice. So we all react a little differently. Now the algal species, and particularly these cyanobacteria species, don't always produce toxins. They rarely produce the toxins. There was a case in Oregon where this particular species created enough toxin production in a pond that had steers that were drinking the water, and within 48 hours, 34 of those steers died, which steers are pretty large animals, so they're usually pretty, you know, fairly bulletproof. They're pretty hefty, pretty strong. They're able to take some abuse. And so it was, in that particular case, it was a liver toxin. They had liver failure that caused the death of those animals. Now, we don't typically see this in humans because we're not out there drinking the water, but a concern could be with, you know, pets that are out there, or triathletes who are out there swimming, not intentionally, but they're out there heavy breathing, and, you know, a certain amount of water is going to accidentally be consumed while they're out there swimming. And then even if there's only minor impacts that occur, you know, I wouldn't risk my children's, health potentially if I knew that these things are out there in higher concentrations. Now, what causes them to produce the toxins? Well, we don't know. There's not any scientific evidence that indicates when and where and what triggers the production of these toxins. So we don't know when it's going to happen. We only know that if it's out there in large concentration, it has the potential to produce, but they rarely do. So it's almost like playing Russian roulette out there, except you've got a gun that has 1,000 chambers to it and there's only one bullet. But you don't know when that bullet is going to come up. And that's the difficulty, is that you can have an area of shoreline where there's toxin producing in a 500-foot or a 50-foot area, and the entire rest of the lake will have no toxin production at all. So you can have isolated areas where there's a presence of the toxin, and then all the rest of the lake be perfectly fine, or all the lake be fine for many years and not have any production. And then all of a sudden on one weekend, you start having production for one reason or another, and nobody really knows why. And that's the difficulty with predicting these kind of things. I err on the side of caution, and we always suggest other people likewise, that if the lake doesn't look good, if it doesn't look like, you would want to swim in it, then don't swim in it. And that way you're being safe with you, you're being safe with your family members. So what happened? Well, when I was out there sampling, and even with the conditions being as bad as they were, there was a lady who was on the shoreline there at the waterfront park, and she had her 2 kids that were swimming in there. And that area of the shoreline wasn't quite as bad as some others. There was some area that may be about 10 feet wide where there was an algal scum that was sitting on the surface. But right where kids were at, there was less than a foot in width where it was located. But knowing that it was up and down in other areas of shoreline very thick, and that had the potential to produce toxins, caused some concern. And so I talked to the lady and I mentioned to her, with the blooms being out here, I'm sampling to analyze the toxin production, and, I would be a little concerned, whether there's a potential that she could have some exposure. So of course, the lady, after she thought about it for a couple minutes, she gathered her kids up and she went off to home or wherever she wanted to go. And you need to think about that also about your businesses, that these individuals who would normally spend the time out here or would have an event out here, they could feel that this is not the place where they want to have or raise their families because of these type of events occurring. An example potentially may be a CEO for a major corporation can come out to Lake County and say, is this where I want to set up my business and bring all my executives and all their families to live here, where my children could potentially be exposed and my family members of the executives may be exposed to something that could cause them harm? Or would they rather go and set up and buy their homes and set up their businesses on the Butler chain where there's improved water quality? So there's an economic impact that occurs. Some of it we readily see, like Gail would see in the realty business by people who are trying to buy and sell. And then there's ones you don't see because you don't know that that executive made the decision that, hey, he saw this event occur and, it's not the type of atmosphere where he wants to relocate his business. So there's unexpected impacts that always occur out there. So what happened? These are the locations where we sampled algal toxins in Lake Minneola. And we found that in most areas, the production of toxin was extremely low. The one area where we did have it elevated was on West Beach. And that sample came up that it was a little over 2 parts per million, which the World Health Organization recommends that if it gets over 10 parts per million, that you prohibit swimming. So at no point in any of our samples did we have a result that indicated it was unsafe for swimmers to enter the water. But again, the problem is that we didn't sample every 50 feet of shoreline. And just because we sample today and it's not present doesn't mean that tomorrow it won't be present. So that's the unknown, that we can go out there just before the triathlon like we did and sample 2 or 3 days beforehand and everything be good. And then 2 days later, it can all be bad. And so that's the unknown when you have these high levels of algal production with these type of species. And then even recently, this is Minnehaha from February 2021. So it's just a month ago. You can see a shoreline area on Minnehaha where you can see the same algal species. It's a combination of Dolichospermum and also microcystin or microcystis that's out there present in the water body. And you can see that it's wind rowing across the lake. It rises to the surface, and then the wind will carry it to one side of the lake where it piles up and it accumulates, and it just so happens on this person's shoreline. I hope this is not the shoreline of anybody who's on this call, because I'm gonna make one of those comments that maybe you shouldn't make in case it is. But of particular note is that you notice that the person has no littoral zone. They've got no aquatic vegetation on their shoreline. They've got no shallow areas that would normally support your larval fisheries, and also the aquatic plants that would provide some sort of nutrient uptake or nutrient removal from our water body. Those things are all lacking on this shoreline. So it's a really bad example of how homeowners should maintain their waterfronts on the Claremont chain. If you like fish, you like fishing, lack of habitat in a desert-like environment like this is not going to support many fish. They have to have the food sources, small larval insects that live on the aquatic plants and around the aquatic plants, and the small fish that feed on those in order for the larger fish to have something to eat. And this is certainly the worst case scenario for that type of environment. Also, the seawall eliminates that really shallow area that is the larval area for very small fisheries. All right, so we'll move on. What drives these algal blooms? Increases in nutrients. It's quite simple. When we look at some of the water quality that we have, water quality data, there's a very good nitrogen data set for the Claremont chain of lakes. And you can see here's Lake Minneola and Lake Minnehaha. And you can see the nitrogen levels in the 70s were averaging below or around 500 parts per million. And now you can see we're easily averaging over 1,000 to 1,500 parts per million. So we've almost tripled our level of nitrogen that's in the water compared to what was there historically. So we're seeing these gradual increases in nutrients coming into the water body. And what does algae like? It likes nutrients. It likes to be fertilized. The nitrogen and phosphorus that comes in help drive its growth. You feed it just like your yard. You feed your yard, it turns nice dark green. You feed your lake, it turns nice dark green too. It's a simple equation that occurs. And so we're seeing that. So where are these nutrients likely coming from? Well, the nutrients are likely coming from a number of sources. We've got a lot more residents here. We've got a lot more yards. We've got a lot of people living on the hills as well as living on the lakefronts who like green yards. And the greener your yard is, the more fertilizer you're likely applying, and the more nitrogen and phosphorus is getting into that groundwater or running directly off into our lakes. And so we're seeing elevated superficial aquifer nitrogen and phosphorus levels that are coming into our lakes and water bodies. We're also seeing an increase in the number of septic tanks. A lot of our developments that are being constructed still are being built with septic tanks. And we've got a lot of old ones that are out there as well as new ones. And the waste is not going on the surface. They're perfectly safe for human use because they take the nutrients that come out of our bodies and it puts it down into the ground, which goes into the water, rather than it coming up on the surface where it would impact human health. But there's the price, is that it's going down into that superficial aquifer and it's seeping and traveling with the groundwater to our lakes. The lakes are the low point in that superficial aquifer. So all the groundwater moves to our lakes and perks in the side of those lakes as a seep. And some people will notice that on their shoreline. They'll see little rivulets of water seeping into the side of the water body. Well, that's that superficial groundwater seeping out of our hills and moving into those water bodies. So that's our loads that we have coming in. So what is the Water Authority doing about it? Well, we've got a couple of programs that we funded in order to do some investigative sampling. We funded a study by Wood that's currently underway, where they're analyzing water quality in our surface water bodies, particularly Lake Minneola, as well as what's coming in from Minnehaha and also Hiawatha, as well as what's draining out to on down the Platte-Lakaha out of Lake Minneola, to see what's coming into the lake from those surface water bodies. And they're sampling areas all around the water body, including algal blooms and algal cells out there to determine what's available and if there's toxin production that's going on. They are also, they have what they call groundwater seepage meters that are located in the bottom of the lake. And it's like an example is, and this is a cheap example, but hopefully something you understand, a 55-gallon drum that's set into the bottom of the water. And what will happen is water will seep out into those barrels, and they have collection bags for water to enter. And they'll take those collection bags and they'll come out once a month and they'll pull those out, take them to the lab and analyze the water quality that's seeping into the bottom of the lake from the surrounding areas. And those things are important because that tells us, you know, what the impact is on the groundwater and how that's potentially feeding algal blooms in those particular water bodies. They also have collection devices for stormwater. So some of our stormwater outfalls that are going into the Lake Minneola in particular, they have devices that are set there to record and collect stormwater so that those can be analyzed in a laboratory too. So these things are all going on, have been going on for about 7, 8, actually more like 9 months now, and they'll continue to collect until August. That will be the end date. So I'll have over a year's worth of data throughout all the different seasons, the rainy season and the dry season throughout the year, on what's coming in through these different periods and different storm events that we'll have. What we're hoping for is that there's a smoking gun, that there's one source that of nutrients that far exceeds the others, that if we address this one, it'll help take care of the major issues that are occurring on Lake Minneola, so that we don't have this repeated event of strong algal blooms occurring. That's the hope, because those are easy to pick out one, put a lot of money into it, a lot of work, a lot of effort into it, and correct that one issue and then see results. But these water quality issues tend to not be just a single smoking gun type of event. It tends to be a combination of all of us. We're the enemy out there. We're the ones causing all these problems. We can't point to one yard in particular and say, you caused all the problems out there in Lake Minneola. It can be a combination of everybody, the impact that everyone is having on it. And then it becomes much more difficult to address. Something else that is occurring on this particular water body is a little over, or about a year ago, or a little over a year ago, I was approached by St. Johns River Water Management District that they had received funding from the state of Florida for an innovative technology to treat algal blooms that are occurring. And they had funding that was earmarked to go towards Lake Washington over in Brevard County, and also Lake Yale and Lake County. And during that meeting, I mentioned to them, we're having a really bad algal bloom that's occurring on Lake Minneola. Lake Minneola has a lot of recreational uses that occur that far exceed any of those other water bodies, and also a lot of public contact, including 2 public swimming beaches that occur on that water body. In the triathlon, that if they're going to use public funds to experiment on trying to reduce algal blooms with a new technique, that this is the water body they should shoot for instead of those other 2. After a few months went by, the state agreed to be able to allow the money to be moved towards Lake Minneola, so that we currently have a company out of Israel who is funding an experimental program to reduce the algal blooms using a chemical that is composed of hydrogen peroxide. It's encapsulated, so it's sealed inside of little pellets that they throw out in the water. And you can see in the images, you can see on the left-hand side, there's an algal bloom that's occurring, and you can see the rows of the green lines in the water. And then in the center and the right image, you can see where they're throwing the white powder out there in those areas. And what happens is the hydrogen peroxide does just like it does when you put it on your skin or your body. It bubbles up, it releases the oxygen, it increases the oxygen levels. We talked about a little bit ago about how cyanobacteria formed at a time period when there was very little oxygen in the earth. And so it is believed that if you increase oxygen levels dramatically, it would oxidize and potentially kill the algal cells. And so that's what it's doing. It's kind of it's not a fix, it's a Band-Aid. It's treating the symptoms, but it doesn't address the source of the issue. So although it's great to have the $1.6 million of the state being used to treat, at least for the past year and a half, these algal blooms that will occur in Mineola, it is not the solution. Unless your solution is to spend $1 million every year on every water body to keep algal blooms from coming. And to me, that's not financially the way to go for the long term, that we really need to address what is causing the problem and not necessarily just keep putting Band-Aids on it, in this fashion. But since it's not our county residents' money, it's the state's money, I'd much rather have them spend it on our water bodies than have them spend it in some place that doesn't benefit us. So what else is the Water Authority doing? Well, we've got the investigative sampling that we're doing. We're assisting by helping to bring this money in from the state and providing these immediate treatments, which hopefully will help in some immediate relief for the short term. But what we're also going to need to do is, we're going to ask our board this year to set aside a large or significant amount of funds for implementing stormwater retrofitting projects, so that some of those pipes that remain that discharge into the Claremont chain of lakes, that we can implement some projects to reduce the loading that's coming in from those locations. And the other thing we need to do is we need to put in a really strong resident lake education program so that the people on top of the hill and the people who live away from the lakes, as well as those who live on the lakes, are aware of the impact that they are having on these water bodies, so that those who care about them will be willing to maybe change some of the habits. In most cases, people just don't know. They don't know that, hey, by them having the greenest yard in the neighborhood, they're also making the greenest lakes in the neighborhood. And so they've got to be able to see those connections between the two, and then they can make a decision whether it's more important for them to have healthy lakes or to have the greenest yard. There's one other thing I wanted to mention to you guys, that we had talked to David Colby, that our agency is considering. We used to historically have on the Claremont Chain of Lake, and you can see the Claremont Chain you guys are all familiar with on the right-hand side, the whole series of lakes going up to Cherry Lake. We have a dam that's located, and you can see that on the left-hand side where the dam is located between Cherry Lake and Hunt Lake. And that dam historically in the levee used to have a boat lift to allow boaters to cross from one side to the other. And because of liability concerns back in, I think it was in the 60s or early 70s, we took out that lift so that somebody didn't get crushed when they're trying to push their boat across. Well, now we're getting ready to replace that Cherry Lake Dam. It's 60 years old. It's well past its useful lifespan, and it's time to put in a new structure. And the question is while we're out there doing the work, whether we should put in a small lock type system that would allow navigation to go from the lower pool of lakes in the Villa City area up to the Claremont Chain of Lakes, as well as people in the Claremont Chain of Lakes get down to the lower pool of lakes. And that's something that we'll need to decide. One of the things of concern is that it won't be cheap. You're probably looking at a $2 million structure, and where the public feels that it is important enough or a benefit enough to spend $2 million on the number of people that would likely utilize that immediately, plus the long term of what the users may be in the future for the number of folks that may live on either one of those chains of lakes. And so that's something that we're going to be making a decision on this year. We currently authorized a survey to be performed by Florida Fish and Wildlife. They have a team of professionals that perform surveys throughout the state of Florida to make sure they're non-biased and statistically valid, so that they can take a portion of the population and be able to extrapolate how everybody would feel about increasing potential navigation through these chains of lakes. I know there are those who say, well, we don't want the people from Claremont coming into our water bodies further to the north, that we don't want that additional traffic. We like to canoe, or we like to kayak, and we don't want all these other, the boating traffic. And there's also a lot of people that are saying, we would like to be able to go fishing there. We would like to get access. We would like to have connections to the rest of the Claremont chain of lakes so we can get to the businesses that operate in those areas. So, we can't necessarily bias the sample. We can't have it going towards one group versus another group. So the people at Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, their staff is going to make sure that it's done, that surveys are sent out and emailed and mailed to a random group of residents that represent both of those areas of the lakes, so that we can come up with the proper amount, or the correct answer on what the public thinks, whether this project is worth implementing or not. We currently have the Villa City Dam under construction. That's being replaced, but there won't be any navigation further north from Villa City. There's only one more dam where the channel has been made navigable north of Villa City. And that other dam past that point is all natural wetland areas. You can't go any further anyway. So there's not much of a benefit in going any further to the north from that point. And that lower left-hand image is just a series of simple manually operated locks like they have in Great Britain by the hundreds, that they've been using since Roman times to be able to allow people to lock boats and move boats through the system. And we don't know whether the dam would be manually operated. We would have it fully automated. So somebody would just come and press the button and the doors would close and water levels would increase to move their boat up to the next level or down to the next level. But it wouldn't be a large structure, only regular medium-sized boats, because we can't fit large boats underneath our bridges that we have, and our channels are too narrow to have very large boats anyways. The last thing my wife particularly wanted me to mention to you guys, that if you're boaters out there, we've got a large group of manatees that are now using the Harris Chain of Lakes. So if you're a boater and you go into the Harris Chain of Lakes, please operate with caution. They're out there. People don't realize or recognize that the manatees are out using the Harris Chain of Lakes, and we're seeing a lot of damages that are occurring, boat strikes that are occurring. These three manatees, the one on the lower half is Leesburg, who was the first manatee that's been recorded entering the Harris Chain of Lakes and living there. And the one in the middle is manatee's baby, Sunset, with which we had a naming contest. Sunset was believed to be born in Lake Eustis, and I wanted to name her Eustis, but unfortunately I lost in the naming contest. More people felt Sunset was a better name than Eustis. And then up on the north is Trevluck, which is, he got his name because if you spell culvert backwards, he got stuck in a culvert. And if you spell culvert backwards, it spells Trevluck. So that was his name. Out of these manatees, Leesburg was killed in the Ocklawaha River, struck by a boat. Actually, this was when she was in very good health, but she had two boat collisions that occurred that damaged her from prop scars, which is the main way to identify manatees, is by their prop scars. And the last one occurred there in the Ocklawaha River at the mouth of Silver River, which luckily was outside of Lake County. And she had a near-term second calf, because Sunset was her first calf, and this was going to be her second one, but unfortunately she and her calf was killed from that boat strike. And then Trevluck at the top, just 2 months ago, was killed in Haynes Creek by another boat strike. We have a much higher mortality rate on our population that lives in the Ocklawaha River and the Harris Chain of Lakes than we do other areas of the state. And so we want to do a better job of educating our residents, that they know that they're out there and that they operate with caution. With that, I'll open up to any questions you guys may have.
Yes, if you could take it off of screen share, perhaps, Ron, and I see something coming across from Joe Jameson. Joe, do you want to? I see you put a comment. Do you want to speak? Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Got it. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so I just wanted everybody to know something that Ron hit on, something that I'm kind of championing really right now. The opening up that lock or that dam up there would increase a lot of different things for everybody. Not only would the home values up there increase approximately $40,000 that were on the water, the ones that have lake access would increase their values approximately $10,000. That's a lot of equity that would be creating for a lot of Lake County residents. Also, a lot of tax revenue that we can create for our community. So the $2 million is kind of short-sighted, in my opinion, that we'll get that money back quickly. Not to mention the revenue that would be created from people that now have access to use the restaurants and the marinas that we have on the other sides of the lake and to connect the counties in there. All in all, I don't see any reason not to open this back up. I've talked to a few people that don't want more people in their backyard, but other than that, there's nobody really that's against this. I think as a public policy committee, we need to be behind this.
Thank you, Joe. All right, anybody else?
Yes, I have a question. Are there any communities that you've ever seen that have made policy change that, like, you can't fertilize your, land or something like that, that's really progressive? Are there any things that you could point to tell us about and how that worked for their lake system?
There are some. I think probably, at least in the state of Florida, the example would be Pinellas County, that they had a very strong fertilizer ordinance that they implemented. And in their ordinance, they even prohibited fertilizer to be stocked in the stores during the off season when it's not allowed to be sold. And so they had a very strong ordinance, but there was backlash to that. The fertilizer industry lobbied and pushed through the legislature laws that prevented other communities from passing similar ordinances. We do have a fertilizer ordinance here in Lake County that our Board of County Commissioners passed, one that prohibits the application of fertilizer during the rainy season. And so there is one in place, but they're not allowed to, because of the law that was passed by the legislature, they're not allowed to prohibit people from selling it in the stores. So we have one that's in place. What would be a good idea is to, particularly, actually in all cities, not just Lake County, but to have our city of Claremont and Mineola and Groveland, all of Lake County cities also pass the same ordinance too, so that there's a uniform rule, whether you're in the county as well as within the cities.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Ron, hi, this is Clinton Pownell. How are you? One of the things that this public policy committee can do or facilitate is through some legislation. But something that keeps running through my mind, and as you were saying this, and I've been living here since '92, and I've heard the same mantra for a long time, almost 30 years now. And I mean, as a matter of fact, I became educated about lakes and all this because of living here, and I don't even live on lakefront. And as you were saying, such as that house you pointed out, I'm appalled by it. And I think that picture was taken in February 2021, that a house would still have that type of seawall without the plants and so forth, as I've heard over the years, is bad for us and bad for us as a community. So one of the things that public policy can do and the chamber can do is facilitate through the chambers and through different up to the board and through the Florida Chamber, et cetera, facilitate some sort of legislation push. I don't know how far that's going to get. You're going to get a lot of pushback, as you said, from lobbyists. And yes, I can sell it all day long, prohibited from dispersing it, fertilizer, for example. But what I was trying to get at is to me, most people in general are not intentionally going to harm the community. And so I'm just wondering, what was going through this is maybe some sort of grassroots effort and some allocation of marketing, and not only just distribute this through all the houses that are immediately affecting, and as you said, the runoff areas that are living on the hills that may not even be on waterfront, unaware that they're even doing this, as well as going to some of the big box stores that are selling the fertilizers and putting up friendly signs saying, hey, this is the situation. Some sort of awareness campaign and an education. I know that was the last thing on there And typically, for whatever reason, whenever issues like this come up, it's always the last thing or never gets done. And I'm just wondering if maybe that should be moved to a higher priority.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where we'd likely get our greatest impact. So your suggestions, I think, are spot on, and that's something that we really should be doing. There is a flyer that was generated by the county regarding the fertilizer ordinance that we could utilize, but that doesn't mean we couldn't take it and personalize it, make it better. You know, if there's something that would make it more usable or more friendly or more attractive to the residents of South Lake County, that's something we should make every effort towards trying to improve and get that out there. And putting it in the stores, I mean, that'd be great if our box stores would post in there what the rules are. They tend to be somewhat hesitant because it reduces sales. But that's where the nice thing was with the Pinellas County ordinance is that, you know, that was required by their local ordinance. It has to be posted so that there is information regarding the sale and notifying people the reason why the fertilizer isn't on the shelf because of the prohibition that they had. But you're not allowed to force that here in Lake County because of the current rules do not allow it.
I think we have time for one
But
more.
we can answer.
We have time for one more question from Steve Hanna, then we need to move on in the agenda. So Steve Hanna.
Thanks. So I represent the Claremont Chain of Lakes Foundation, a local nonprofit that promotes fun, safe, and healthy activities on and around the lakes. And I couldn't agree more with everything you've said, especially the need for education. We have a Facebook group called Boaters and Floaters, which has more than 3,000 members who enjoy the lake activities here in Claremont. And I think there's a real opportunity there to use social media to get the word out in the community in a way that perhaps official government channels might not. I completely agree with Clinton as well that people don't want to cause the lake algae bloom. So once we have the data and we can show, you know, it's disparate, many different sources, it's all of us making a small contribution that's causing the problem, and only by changing that can we solve the problem. I think that would be very helpful. I think a lot of people use lawn services also and may simply not know what their lawn service is doing about fertilizer. So there might be opportunity to, you know, give them some questions they should be asking their lawn service, or even to reach out to the lawn services individually to try to look for other ways that they can give you a good lawn, healthy lawn, without putting too much fertilizer on.
Good point.
Okay,
Yeah, some really good ideas.
Okay, Sherry, we're going to move on, but before we do, I'm going to suggest that I know we might want to discuss these issues more as a committee, and there's some other things coming up. I'm going to suggest that perhaps next Thursday at 8 a.m. we reconvene if there's some positions that the group wants to suggest, but I think we do need to move on.
I think that's fine. So next on the agenda is Daniel Whitehouse. So Daniel, I'm going to let you talk about something that's a little similar in nature, and go ahead.
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, keeping with the theme of clean and healthy water in Lake County, I want to turn our attention to a different body of water that probably is significantly larger than what we're talking about with regard to Mineola, and that's Lake Apopka. It's the fourth largest lake in the state, and if you know some of the history, the state bought up a lot of the farmland on the north end of it that had contributed to a decline in water quality on Lake Apopka. And that was in the 90s. And so since then, St. John's Water Management has been managing the restoration of the lake. You know, the bad stuff has largely stopped going into the lake, but now it's a matter of treating what is there to not only clean up the water in Lake Apopka, but the rest of the water that flows into the Harris Chain. When Alan Hayes was in the Senate, he was able to get $50 million appropriated to the cleanup of Lake Apopka. And that was done in the form of $5 million a year. That's actually written into state statute, and it comes from the Land Trust Fund, which is part of the fund that also helps to clean up the Everglades. That money was received by St. John's Water Management District for a year or two when it was initiated, and then the past 3 years has been blocked. So they did not receive, you know, the 15 million so far of the 50 that was allocated. A number of organizations have taken a position to contact the legislators already. You know, letters of support have gone out in support of not blocking this money in this upcoming session, so that the money does go to St. John's Water Management District. The Friends of Lake Apopka is one, Orange Audubon Society is another, and the West Orange Chamber through their Public Policy Committee have all taken positions. I would like for our chamber to take a similar position. Again, the money is in state statute that St. John's is supposed to receive $5 million a year. The legislator has consciously blocked it from going to St. John's for the past 3 years, and a number of the projects that are designated for this money sit on the Lake County side of Lake Apopka. So, I mean, we're about 1/3 of the lake in Lake County and then 2/3 in Orange County. But all of the water that runs out of Lake Apopka and into the Harris Chain is on the Lake County side, as is a large part of the shoreline that sits on Montverde, you know, that starts around Oakland and then goes around Gordon Neck Springs through some of the unincorporated Lake County. So I have the text that has been sent by those other organizations, and it essentially says this money is allocated as part of the land trust and, you know, Florida statute, blah, 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 blah. We ask that you not block it this year because it's important to the cleanup and ongoing activities in the lake.
Sounds good. Any discussion from the committee members?
We'll share that out with the committee, Daniel, and we'll look to take a position on that.
Okay. Thank you.
So if we want to take a position on that, what's our timeline, Daniel, that we need to get that?
Yesterday.
Yeah. So what if we send out the information to the committee members? Could we do an electronic support of yay or nay individually, then come back? Or what's your suggestion, David?
Yes, we can do that. Amanda will facilitate that, and we'll send it out to the entire committee. We can do that today.
Perfect. Okay, good. We'll stay on that. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
And then let's jump to Clinton and Daniel to talk about the impact fees. I think there was an attachment that was included in the meeting packet. So either one of you want to start that discussion?
I defer to Clinton.
Thanks, Daniel. Actually, I'm somewhat prepared for this anyways. So what's, in a nutshell, there's House Bill 337, and Senate, which is now also Senate Bill 750. This was an impact fee restriction on our local governments to be able to facilitate fees. One of the things that I would say that I would push for, that one of the things that the entire country, what makes the United States so great, is the independence. What's not enumerated from the federal government falls to the states, and what's not enumerated from the states falls down to the counties and cities and municipalities, et cetera. And what this seems to be is a push to centralize and restrict local governments from being able to facilitate their needs. And what's alarming in this impact fee package, by the way, it is supported by one of our local reps, Sabatini, as far as a co-sponsor. And it was pushed through into the the Administrative and Veterans Affairs, and now it's gone into Ways and Means, and it's gone through one revision. But what's really alarming to this is there is a restriction that impact fees can only be raised every 4 years. That if there's restrictions on how much they can go up. For example, they can't go and increase more than 50%. There's provisions that they go up between 25 to 50%. And this is really, really alarming and also restrictive. And if I were to point out, albeit Orange County did this, but 6 months later immediately realized their mistake and rectified this during the recession. They had reduced impact fees to 0 and then put them back to the full impact fees. If that were the case, this bill allows for reduction, but will not allow for that increase. Lake County did the same thing, except we had a longer period, and it was very detrimental to our schools because that's the only funding was impact fees. And they did this for an extended period of time, then only came back at a small percentage and then put it back to full impact fees. Not actually, I don't think they hit the exact mark that was metricked. And actually, this bill does say that the impact fees have to be metriced or cannot exceed a certain metric to be allocated as, for example, transportation, schools, et cetera, water, drainage, sewage, anything that's an impact. But this clearly is, in my opinion, something that's been going on. There's been a trend lately that the state of Florida legislature is trying to, and Daniel's shaking his head, is trying to take control and take the power out of local government. And in my opinion, that's one of the founding things that this makes the United States what we are. And I would like to propose that the chamber take a stance. We write a letter to our representatives why this is still in committee, opposing this, and even since this is a Florida effort, is to get other chambers, local chambers involved, and do this as a concerted effort. Daniel, I'll now defer to you.
You know, the only thing I'll add to that, you know, from my perspective, I want the representatives who we sit at the table with and have coffee with and run into in restaurants, I want them making decisions that affect me the most, because those are the people who, if they get it wrong, we've got a throat to choke that's, you know, within our own community. And that's a blunt way to say it, but I mean, I think that's the bedrock of the whole local rule reasoning, right? I mean, we want our local representatives making the rules and ordinances that affect us, and they should know best what we need. So taking that up to the state level is not appropriate, in my opinion.
Pat, did you want to say something?
Me?
Yes, you. I'm sorry.
No, I don't want any. I'm supportive of them at 100%. So impact fees are something that pretty much for me as a elected official, that's how I grow my community. That's how I provide infrastructure, development, paying for future needs of my city. So that's, yes. We never reduced impact fees in the city, even though the county did. I'm all for them.
Well, and again, back to Clinton and Daniel's point, as well as yours, is that, you know, that should, coming from our local and city and county reps is a much better solution than coming from the state.
Yes.
So Dave, how do you want to, do we need to make a motion? Or?
I'm going to rely on Clinton and Daniel to help craft some language for that.
If you may, if there's any other officials on the call, once you craft that, David, can we kind of just get it out to the cities, and we can try to pass resolutions within the cities too, pretty quickly, try to do something to get it out there. That's even if it's just a letter or something. Because I mean, the chamber is great coming from, but the more you get out, the better. I would appreciate it.
Excellent. Yeah, we will do that. We'll get something crafted, share with the committee, and then have something we can share with the cities as well.
City managers. Yep. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. Any other discussion on that before we move to our next topic? Okay, thank you. So our next meeting schedule is Thursday, May 6th, which is, just so you know, 2 days after my birthday, May 4th. So, and the proposed topic and speaker would be Steve Smith regarding workforce housing. I didn't know if Steve joined us just to tee it up, or...
Steve was supposed to be on the call, but I'm not seeing him on here.
Okay, that's fine. And then because we have that issue regard a couple of issues that are out there hanging closely, did we want to try and schedule a meeting for next Thursday, Dave?
I think that would be great if we do 8 a.m. next Thursday, just to come together as a committee to take any additional actions we need to.
Great. And then speaking of 8 a.m. for this meeting next week, there's been some discussion individually regarding the time of this committee meeting and whether we want to keep it at a 7:30 or move it to an 8 a.m. So we're going to be sending out a survey so you can kind of indicate your time frame. You know, with Zoom, it kind of makes things a little bit easier and different as far as being able to coordinate schedules, but we did want to put this out to the committee as a whole. So you'll be receiving an email from Amanda with a survey where you can give your input about best timing for highest participation for this committee. Okay.
Do we think that we'll continue having a Zoom option even when in-person events return?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, we're exploring that with not only this committee but our board. I think we've gotten into an environment where a lot of people want that option, and we can have higher participation. So, you know, we need to flesh it out more, but we're looking at possibly having a hybrid. So you know, we can have people in person and on Zoom. We're fortunate that we have some equipment here that lends itself well to that. So yeah, we're exploring it, but I think at this point it's going to be difficult to get rid of the Zoom option because we can have a lot of participation.
Very good.
Good. All right. Well, with that, I think we are adjourned. We will see you next week, and you'll get that information for us to flesh out these topics. And then watch your email for additional information language from Daniel and some other information about the impact fees. Everyone have a great day. Be safe out there. Happy April Fool's Day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.